anyone says they have all the answers, that's where I put my critical thinking cap and say, really? Are you sure? Help me understand that. I'm curious about that. I don't really know what's real online, and I have trust issues with the internet. But we're all figuring it out. I'm figuring it out. Who am I to trust? How am I supposed to interact? How am I supposed to behave in this space? We need to have tools that are flexible, and at this point in time, we don't have artificial general intelligence. Can this be a tool or a toolkit to help others who want to build relationships online, who want to facilitate their current relationships online?
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Cecilia Dones, the founder and chief data officer of the New York-based consultancy 3 Standard Deviations. Ceci describes her role as helping organizations and individuals navigate through the discomfort and uncertainty of AI and technology, helping them to move from, I don't know, and I'm scared, and missing out, to making the most of this ever-changing environment and what it can offer. In our bigger and bigger data world, there's a keen need for people like Ceci. Describing herself as a transformative polymath, Ceci's guidance is focused on artificial intelligence, advanced analytics strategy, and data-driven digital transformation. With a background both agency and client side, from Mindshare and Zenith Media to L'Oreal, Ceci is currently putting the finishing touches to her doctorate on trust and authenticity in virtual environments. On her excellent Substack blog, Authentic Interactions, Ceci describes herself as a qual-quant researcher who fell in love with the idea of telling stories about people with data. I'm compassionately curious and am eager to share and learn with you. A curious data storyteller. What a perfect guest for Data Malarkey. It's great to have you with us, Ceci. Now, I trust that was a decent summary of who you are and what you do. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I've got wrong?
I would say, first of all, thank you for everyone who's listening, everyone who's watching, and everyone who has interest in this kind of weird space. So thank you so much. What I would add, I would say, to oversimplify everything, I'm really obsessed with figuring out connections between people. And because for many of us in our lived experience today, because we use technology to amplify, to access, to find other ways to connect to others, we have to figure out, how do we do this with this technology thing? And how do we do it in a way that's very human-centric? And how do we do it in a way that never forgets our dignity? It's always easy to get involved with the ones and zeros, less so when it's another person. So yeah, very good summary. Thank you. You've read some of my work. Thank you.
I most certainly have. Listen, I do prepare it. I do think it's important to prepare and not just to wing it. I think some of my former collaborators and colleagues might have said that I had a tendency to wing it, but I think I'm losing that desire to wing it. I'd much rather be informed. And I love your talk about humanity and empathy. And I have to say, in my world of particularly training in data storytelling, from pharma to finance, it's much more. I spend much more time talking about empathy than I do talking about data analytics. Now, before we start and talk about data, I want to start with a question that's designed to get to the heart of what makes you, you. And it doesn't necessarily ask you to tell us about your work. So tell me, if you would, Ceci, how do you spend your time?
Oh, that is a very good question. It's a little bit biased, right? So I have a little bit of recency bias. As you mentioned, I am finishing my doctoral dissertation. So it is a lot of nonfiction reading at the moment. My most recent book I read, Human Compatible by Stuart Russell. Very, very good book. Very contemporary. I think one of the challenges with trying to keep up with the AI space is that the moment something comes out in print, it's already out of date. There are very few contemporaries, I would argue, that their work tends to transcend a little bit more of the time. So I find that piece to be quite helpful. So I spend a lot of time reading. So fun facts. Do I read digital books, or do I how do you say dead tree books? I still Yes, I still do that. What's in my I'm a very good patron of the library. I firmly believe in all of that. And maybe someone can post it. I'm also reading at the moment Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence. So that's another good one that I would say it has been a few years, but it's still highly, highly, highly relevant. And these large thinkers, yes, they can be polarizing for some individuals. But if we remove some of that and just really think about the underlying, well, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to use technology to better understand ourselves, better understand our environments? I think those are all good things. So I spend an awful lot of time reading. I spend an awful lot of time writing. So, yes, I do have a Substack. I do also have a newsletter that I keep on LinkedIn focused on CMOs. So, what is a CMO to do with AI? What is this AI thing? And it is my one person attempt to try to bridge the gap between what we love to do as marketers, understanding people, telling stories of our brands to people and consumers, and bridging that with data and technology. And so pulling those two worlds together, uh, reading, writing. I was not planning on sharing this, but why not? I am also a yoga teacher on the side. So I do private lessons. I've been a practitioner for decades at this point. And I'm all about the finding how to express yourself and connect with yourself on the mat and off the mat. And then I'll also share this one too, more recently within the last year or so. It might have been a reflection on the level of intellectual rigor that I have to put into my academic work. But I've gotten back to Argentine tango. So I was a former competitive ballroom dancer, and many moons have passed. But in the last few years, especially towards the end of my dissertation, I've gotten back into dance. So another way of trying to find connection.
Very good. What a fantastic balance. I had a long flirtation with yoga. It kind of comes and goes. It was an obsession. I'm interested. What school? I was an Ashtangi. What school do you teach in?
Ooh, okay, okay. So I came up through the lineage of Bhakti and Vinyasa. So very much about celebration, very much about movement, very much about learning how to understand how you want to express yourself. And so it was very, very beautiful. Um, I did do a little bit in Ashtanga, but I will be honest, it's a bit rigorous for me. I probably will go back to it. What I love about that discipline actually is that it very much focuses you on what are you doing as an individual. So you're not necessarily swayed by the other individuals in the room, but it's really your journey, your practice. What are you doing right now? And so in some ways, it's quite present in terms of a discipline. Do I do them all? Yes. Do they do them all the time? No. My body won't allow me to do that, and that's part of the beauty of yoga.
I'm completely with you. The rigor of Ashtanga. You haven't got a chance to look at anybody else in the Sangam. Absolutely no chance at all. Now, listen. I mentioned that your consultancy is called Three Standard Deviations, and as the data savvy and our audience will appreciate, it's a beautifully data-driven name, a domain of the normal distribution in which virtually all observed data fall. The 99.7% for the statistics heads. Tell us a bit more about quite literally the genius of your consultancy name.
Well, first of all, thank you. I wouldn't say it's genius, but I would say it was a reflection, actually, on my philosophy on life. So I am a trained statistician. I am so ancient. There was no such thing as a data scientist when I was in university the first time around. So I became a statistician. And what I love about the Gaussian curve, the normal curve, the bell curve, is that in many phenomenon in our daily lives, it helps to explain kind of what's going on. Most of the time, you're going to be happening at the mean. You get your cup of coffee or your cup of tea. You go to the office. You have your lunch. You have your normal routines. So that's very much happening at the center. However, every once in a while, a train is delayed or something happens in your day, and suddenly you start moving away from the center, moving towards the further standard deviation, so away from the center. And if anyone can imagine, a Gaussian curve or a bell curve literally looks like a bell. And so most of the time you spend time at the mean, but more rarely you start to spend time further and further away from the mean. And so my philosophy is the the things in your life that changes the trajectory of your life, that one yes, that changes your whole perspective of what you do and what you want to do and the value you want to create, never happens at the mean. It always happens in that very rare moment at the third standard deviation. By definition, it's rare. By definition, you have to pay attention to see it, otherwise, you won't. But when you do see it, when you do experience it, and when you do acknowledge it, ah, we are now awake. We are now living. Now, something magical is going to happen. And so that's what I hope for myself as a person. That's what I hope for my clients that I coach. It's what I hope for organizations. So many organizations, they want to do the AI, they want to extract value from data and analytics, and they have beautiful storytellers, and yet nothing changes. The behavior doesn't change. The decisions don't change. Maybe they vary a little bit, but the outcomes not changing enough. Oh, why? Why is that happening? So I hope for those organizations by working with me and other colleagues that I would recommend, like yourself, oh, maybe we can start pulling away from the average, pulling away from the mean. Maybe we can get to that third standard deviation and have that magical moment that makes that difference for your organization. And my argument is that it kind of happens through data analytics and AI.
It's an even better there is an even better reason and a kind of personal story of philosophy than I knew and had suspected. Now, you talk about working with both organizations and individuals. Could you kind of talk to us about what it's like to what a typical engagement is like? Let's start at the organizational level and then maybe look at the individual level of somebody who's really kind of facing challenges with AI and data.
Mm-hmm. So my current work is primarily focused on leaders and their teams. So let's say you're a leader that has gotten the decree, we need to now utilize generative AI in your discipline. Show me how you're doing that. And on top of that, tell me what the ROI is. Deers in the headlights. What do you mean? There's more than one AI. What? I thought AI was a verb. Uh-oh. So I tend to come in those situations to help provide clarity. Well, what does AI mean for you as a leader? And more importantly, what does it mean for your organization? Because AI, the application of it inside of organizations can look very, very different. And so the example I tend to say is for some organizations, AI could be utilization of your email platform. Has anyone ever clicked on a spam email in the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days at work? Most likely not. Guess what? Your spam email, machine learning. Depending on the individual, that could be defined as AI. Or in some organizations, they mean very specifically generative AI. And then right now, what's very popular is agentic AI. What does that mean? And then helping those leaders not one educate themselves, but also figure out how do I actually implement this in a pragmatic way inside of my teams, inside of my organizations, in such a way that other people, my stakeholders, my bosses, my customers, internal and external, can understand what I'm doing and the value that I'm creating. So I help organizations with that. I do a lot of 101s. So, for example, I am currently working with an organization, a people partners department. So they really want to amplify their talent. They want their talent to be utilizing the best in tools to create the most value for their organization. Oh, they need to unpack, what is this generative AI thing? What is this AI thing? How do I use it in my teams as a people partner department or HR department? So I'm helping them with 101, 201, 301 type courses. For another organization, they really want to learn how to do prompt engineering better. So their data teams, their IT teams have built beautiful tools. The tools are not being utilized to their fullest extent. People are scratching their heads. Why? What's the ROI of this? Why did we do this? Why aren't we extracting value? So prompt engineering, I will do that as well. And then in other cases, typically smaller cases, organization will ask me, well, we are utilizing AI, but now we need to rethink, what does it mean career progression? What does it mean the organization of my team? Doesn't make sense that I have this many roles at this level. Doesn't make sense that I would expect them or try to have them have experiences in these other areas so that way they can climb up the ladder. Is there a ladder or is it more of a path? If it is a path, is it a winding path? What does that mean now in the context of AI and its implementations inside of organizations? When it comes to individuals, I am about leadership. I will die on the soapbox if I have to, or die on the mountain. My English is not so good. Uh, I'm mixing too many metaphors. I will stand on the soapbox and or die on the mountain. I think that's how you say. I'm very big on diversity leadership. And so I firmly believe that for us to do this AI thing ethically and responsibility in a responsible way, we need to make sure we have diverse voices and diverse voices at all levels, including leadership. So I do work with clients that are up and coming leaders or individuals who are leaders already. However, this whole technology thing is kind of throwing everyone for a loop. And so, how do I adapt my leadership skills to add that into my arsenal of leadership styles? So, I will work with leaders in that way as well.
A question that's it sounds I come across people who are needing not only their brows mopping, individuals, teams, whole organizations needing brows mopping, but need actionable, practical advice all the time. So you're fulfilling a hugely valuable service, and it sounds to me like you're pointing in the right direction. Something that strikes me is that many people. I'm not basing this on a statistical survey, but many people appear to be floundering right now. Do you think there's a normal distribution across either corporate executives or across organizations, or do you think it's skewed very much to one side of the bell curve, the kind of the underperforming side of the bell curve, or do you think that the mean adoption of AI? My cat's tail has just arrived here. The mean adoption of AI is actually at a low level, and it's just that in history we're at an early stage.
So I think we are definitely in early stages. There's a lot of rigorous academic work that still needs to be done, especially when it comes to kind of the responsible AI ethics type of space. So learning how to build these machines and these tools in such a way that we always are able to respect human dignity and maintain the control we want to take. So there's still a lot of work to do that. So we are still in early days. When it comes to the commercial side of things, I do appreciate that perspective, and I see it all the time, especially when I talk to leaders who this may not be their bread and butter, or maybe they have another stakeholder who's more akin to the AI space or data space. It, there's a lot of uncertainty. And there's a lot of ambiguity in this space because it is all new. And because of that, I'm seeing some of the um, echoes of previous waves of technology change. So, unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of FOMO, a lot of fear of missing out, and a lot of just anxiety and fear that, oh, I am not doing this right. I am not doing this enough. And usually in my engagements, one of my first messages to all leaders, and sometimes I'll say it very open, and sometimes I'll pull that person aside and say it privately. Um, you are enough. You're a part of an organization that has been successful. Your career has been successful. And so we're all figuring this out together. And so if anyone says they have all the answers, that's where I put my critical thinking cap and say, really? Are you sure? Help me understand that. I'm curious about that. But we're all figuring it out. I'm figuring it out. Every single day I hear of a new AI development, some upgrades, some change that I need to keep up with. It's okay. I'm exactly where I need to be. The most important thing for me to focus on as a leader and as a practitioner in AI is keep the processes going, keep the process of self education going, keep the process of engaging with others going. And so, yes, I recognize that many feel like, oh, we're not doing enough AI, or the AI we're doing isn't as grandiose or as big as the promise that we were told it was supposed to be. It is okay. As long as you keep moving forward, you are doing enough. We're all just figuring this out together.
Very good. Very, very, very both reassuring, but also I think a reflection that we're not suddenly going to. We are. Things are suddenly changing, but we're not suddenly going to get not all of us are suddenly going to get all of the benefits immediately. I mentioned that your research is focused on trust and authenticity signals in virtual environments. Can you talk to us a little bit about the issues of conveying and picking up on trust and authenticity in virtual environments? Clearly, when it's hard to know if those we interact with are even real or not, particularly in an age of large language models that act as conversational partners.
Yes, very, very true. And thank you for the question. So, for those listeners and watchers as well, that's a very fancy way of saying, I don't really know what's real online, and I have trust issues with the internet. So, all of my research is really about how do I figure out who am I to trust? How am I supposed to interact? How am I supposed to behave in this space? And so the idea is that one, for me, I'm being selfish, learn for myself, but also, can this be a tool or a toolkit to help others who want to build relationships online, who want to facilitate their current relationships online? How rare, and I would be very curious to actually study this, how often in our relationships are they purely 100% only in real life? I only interact with this person in real life. Or the other case, I only interact with this person or this entity online. Typically, no. The majority of our relationships in our day to day lives, professional and personal, are hybrid. And so, what happens in those hybrid cases when we're trying to figure out what's real and what's not real? And so, I would say, yes, I have trust issues with the internet. One of the things I'm beginning to learn and beginning to shed light on is when we're figuring out who to trust or what we're interacting with. Is this real? And how do we interpret what's happening? I think it's important to focus on what is the baseline. So just like in your normal day-to-day relationships, when you interact with someone and they have a baseline of saying hello to you every single time, but suddenly start behaving cold, or they suddenly are overly excited, that's usually a social signal that says, oh, something is different. Oh, maybe I should investigate further. Maybe I can strengthen the relationship by finding out more, or maybe I need to make a different choice. In virtual spaces, this gets really difficult. And as of this moment, we do not have, to my knowledge, a global version of the EU AI Act. So we have no means at this moment to have uniform ways and standards and norms to say, oh, we are interacting with AI. So something in the ethics space and the responsible AI space that many people will tend to say is a good idea is it might be a good idea that anytime we're interacting with a chatbot or something that is AI, It has to declare itself as, oh, I'm not a real person. I am a machine, or I'm an agent, an AI agent working on behalf of a real person. So that sounds great. It sounds like a good potential rule to have. We don't have it yet, so our corporations will have to self-select to be that transparent with their consumers. There's some benefit with that transparency when you're trying to build trust. Usually, being transparent and usually demonstrating your benevolence tends to be a good thing. So corporations could make that choice without having regulation there. But I would say this gets a little bit tricky. It's unfortunately in the AI space, especially now, nothing is black and white. Everything is a beautiful shade of gray in some ways. And what I mean by that is there isn't a one and a zero. Everything is a spectrum. And therefore, when we're trying to figure out if someone is real or not real, let's say, for example, in this conversation now, what if in my earpiece I had some notes feeding in on my own personal reflections of the potential questions that could be asked of my work and the things I wanted to say that I thought was really important for your listeners? What if that was feeding into my ear? So I'm augmenting myself with some machine that's probably reading through a whole bunch of my work and kind of giving me a summary. So maybe we can argue it's AI. Do I have to declare that? Is that the right thing to do? We don't necessarily have these answers yet. And I would argue not having the answers, okay, we don't have answers to a lot of things. More importantly, we don't have norms. So we don't know what's normal to do in these spaces. And this is where I think AI culture will become more and more important for us to understand collectively. Because what is socially normal to do in these spaces? I don't know. So I'm not 100% machine, but if I have an earpiece helping me, am I 100% human or am I augmented? And how much do I disclose that? And so when I'm trying to think about building trust and authenticity, it starts to become an individual decision. If it's important to me to disclose this to someone else that I'm trying to build trust with, maybe I do make that choice. Maybe in a different context, so it's highly contextual, I argue, you know what? Everyone has it. Most individuals at this point, I'm finding, at least in my lived experience, when you jump into a Zoom call or a Teams call, most individuals will have their AI assistant join the call as well to help with notes and also with recording. It's becoming a social norm. And so these things are changing all the time. What it means to be authentic in virtual spaces. How do we build trust in these virtual spaces? So I would say that figuring out what's the baseline when you have an individual relationship and then looking for when those things change. That's usually a prompt to say, oh, let's get curious about this. Is this a new way of interacting? Or is this a signal to me to pay more attention? And so that's what I'm finding out in my work. There's definitely more to be done, especially as other technologies, Internet of Things, augmented reality, virtual reality, as those things become more ubiquitous. Again, we'll have the same questions again, and we'll have to find new answers.
Hello there. It's your host, Sam here. Well, if you've been inspired by this conversation and want to find out what type of data storyteller you are, why not visit our scorecard at data-storytelling.scoreapp.com, complete 12 simple questions, and you'll instantly be served with a report telling you what type of data storyteller you are. Now, back to the action. Really interesting. A number of things have sprung to my mind. I was having a conversation recently about Adrian Brody, the actor Adrian Brody, and his appearance in this Oscar-nominated shortlisted movie, The Brutalist, and when he speaks Hungarian, a very difficult, Hungarian and Finnish, the only two languages related to one another, phonetically very difficult. When he speaks Hungarian, an AI assistant was used. Now I know the movies are all artifice, so is this just another point? I don't particularly want to ask about that. I want to ask you a bit about uncertainty. There's a couple of things that have made me think about uncertainty. I mentioned your Substack blog, Authentic Interactions. And in addition, published towards the end of January, the time of our recording, 25, you talk about the need to prevent unintended consequences with AI. And a couple of weeks ago, I went to a lecture given by a guy called Neil Lawrence. He's the DeepMind professor of machine learning at Cambridge University in the UK. And he talked about the arms race between machines and humans. He talked. It wasn't his work, but he was talking about the processing power of computers being about 300 million times faster than a human being. Typically, we can manage about 10 bits of information per second, and computers can go 300 million times faster than that. And that outperformance in the data arms race can certainly make us feel certainly less intelligent than even the most rudimentary AI tools. Another strand, before I come to my question, is a recent guest. About a month ago, we had Sylvie Delacroix, who's a professor at the Centre for Data Futures at King's College London. And she was talking about the need to inject more uncertainty into the outputs of large language models to make them more useful and more usable. If you ask an LLM now, so long as you're not asking it a taboo topic, it will give you an answer that has kind of no degree of uncertainty about it at all. And in human interactions, there's uncertainty. We've both expressed different degrees of uncertainty on a number of things. I wondered, could you talk a little bit? You talk about the control challenge for AI in that edition. Could you talk a little bit about uncertainty and the role of uncertainty in the context of the control challenge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no worries. So first, a little bit of back it up, because something you mentioned actually sparked a thought. I think one of the challenges we have, and why I think the idea of introducing uncertainty in the output could be quite useful, a couple of reasons. The first one is when we're thinking about arguments, and not in a negative connotation, but in the how do I convey information to convince you, persuade you, influence what you're thinking? Very often we default to positions of authority. Oh, my doctor said this. They're a specialist. Hopefully, you know a little bit more about me, and my GP can potentially help me with whatever ailment I have. Or a professor who's been highly specialized and well recognized within the industry. So we tend to defer a lot to authority when it comes to information. And what's interesting about technology and AI and the LLMs is because it appears as though they present information in such a way and communicate information in such a way with such confidence, we defer authority to them. And that is a natural human response. There's nothing wrong with it. It is context for us to deal with, which is why I love the idea of introducing uncertainty. So another thought related to that was we used to hate hallucinations. There was almost like a 12 months, all of last year. Ooh, hallucination. No, no, no. We don't want that. Let's remove them. Let's remove them. Thank goodness time has passed, and there is now growing conversations around, oh, these hallucinations is information. It's telling us something about how the LLMs are thinking. And in some ways, because the LLMs are trained on our information or the information of the internet, people can debate on how reflective that is of humanity. But because it's trained on human data, it's also a reflection of us. So can these hallucinations actually be a way for us to learn a little bit about creativity? And so I work in the marketing advertising space primarily, helping organizations with their AI and technology data and analytics. But this is an exciting space. I kind of want to better understand it for marketers, for advertisers, for brands when it comes to the LLMs. When it comes to this is where I plug the book again, Human Compatible. The issue with control and why creating machines that have a natural deference to uncertainty, so they're not sure if they're fully true of the answer, also means we put in a feedback loop into their process such that, I have an answer. It could be the preference of my user, but I don't know. Maybe I should check in with the human. This is such a great opportunity. And frankly, those of us who've been in the communication space for a while, active listening for the machines, this is a great way of making sure that dialogue is moving in a direction where the human can maintain their dignity and maintain their control over the output. So, utilizing uncertainty not in a negative way, but in a way to create curiosity, in a way to create creativity, in a way to create a feedback loop, such a responsible, active learning, active listening type of way to create our technologies to help us, as opposed to washing our hands and we defer to the machines. So I find it to be a beautiful idea to help us be more proactive in the way we interact with our technology.
I think Sylvie Delacroix talks a lot about humility markers, and I was originally a classicist, and although it's fair to say that the 5th century BC philosopher Socrates was not a humble person, in his quest, at least as reported by his amanuensis Plato, he as a character looking to find out the essential nature of things, he often started an inquiry with the line, "All that I know is that I know nothing." And I sometimes wish that an LLM would be a little bit more Socrates. Now, going from well, I'm not sure if we're going from the sublime to the sublime, but slightly out of left field. At time of recording, but it's certainly I think we're on the same schedule, UK US. We're between episodes 2 and 3 of the second series of the TV series Severance, and I know that you are a fan. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your AI mediated consumption of this series.
Yes. So a little vulnerable, and maybe some haters can tweet back at me or X back at me, or I'm actually on Blue Sky. I don't actually know, what do we say in Blue Sky? Okay, message me. Um, so because I am doing all this research work related to my dissertation, I don't have a lot of free time um, to actually consume media directly. I do prioritize written word. I do prioritize books. However, when it comes to visual and audiovisual, I tend not to have a lot of time. So I'm a big fan of analysts who analyze the show Severance to understand the contextual, metatextual context of what's happening in the show. And then for the pieces of the show where I'm like, oh gosh, I really want to experience that myself, to kind of feel it myself. Or, oh, this piece of acting, or this piece of technical camera work, or what they chose with the lighting, or what they chose with the sound. When I get excited about those storytelling elements, that's when I'll go back to the original piece and actually watch it through. But I find it ever so fascinating to listen to analysts analyze it from their specific disciplines. So if it is from music, if it is from directing, if it's from writing, if it's from set design, costume design, all those things. I am not a specialist in any of those areas, but listening to their passion about describing that show just really excites me to be more curious about the show. And then in terms of, I guess, the meta of all of it is my own lived experience. The majority of my career has been in corporate office settings. And there's often times where one thing is said as opposed to one thing that is felt, as opposed to one thing that was thought versus the one thing that was done. And so the splitting of all of those different things can feel like a performance sometimes. And so the reflection of that feeling in this contemporary environment, um, the thing I love about story, and the thing I love about science fiction, so when I have time to read science fiction, is that it is a reflection of what we're thinking about as a culture, of our lived experience. And so I really love Severance for that. I have a feeling, at least in my very narrow view of the circle of the people who are around me, um, we're all feeling this kind of unease around there seems to be multiple selves that we're not fully integrating. And so, what I offer to anyone who works with me as a client, professionally, personally, how do we find a way to integrate all of those things together? How do we find that union, bring it back to yoga, that union both on and off?
Very nice, very nice, very nice gestalt there from yoga through severance to bringing one's whole self to work or not. Now, so often, particularly in corporate life, I also have the battle scars of corporate life too. We're pigeonholed and required to pick a lane. And in the ever-shifting sands of AI and digital media, I know that you're a passionate advocate of the no labels movement. Can you tell me why and what consequences that has for the work that you do?
Yeah. So it's not an official, haha, funny. It's not an official label of a movement, but I have issues with labels. And the reason why I say that is we are living in an environment highly ambiguous, lots of uncertainty. And so we need to have tools that are flexible. And at this point in time, we don't have artificial general intelligence. Yes, very fancy people who make all sorts of other compensation that are above my pay grade are making claims that at least this point in time, we're still very much in narrow artificial intelligence. And so, what does that mean? Let's play to our strengths as humans, meaning our adaptability, our flexibility in our cognitive structures, and our ability to think through things is our superpower. So why not use it? I dislike labels because suddenly it puts a paradigm, it puts a framework, it makes assumptions about who I am and the value I can deliver, and it puts assumptions and constraints on the value that my clients think they can deliver. It starts to remove some of that creativity. And so, if we were to remove these labels, I would say, gosh, now we have opportunity. Oh, we get to think about these problems in higher order terms as opposed to concrete, discrete things that actually sometimes the machines can actually solve better than we can. Good example, chess. And so I think having more flexibility of how we describe ourselves or more flexibility in how we think about ourselves as highly multidimensional individuals, not only one demonstrates adaptability, we're all going to have to be adaptable very, very soon, if not already, because technology will change the way we live our lives. Um, and it shows that we're innovative, meaning something that wasn't done before we get to create that and we get to demonstrate that in the liminal spaces, the between spaces where nobody wanted to be before because everyone was picking lanes. So why not be that? Holistic problem solving. We live in ecosystems. Our environment is an ecosystem. That's where the words came from. And so when we're trying to solve problems for our businesses, it's never, again, it's not a discrete, very simple, almost textbook type of question. It's a very complex question where there isn't necessarily a whole bunch of wrong answers, but there isn't also necessarily a whole bunch of right answers. So thinking through how does the solution potentially affect an entire ecosystem, holistic problem solving. I think that only happens when you have broader views. This is why a CEO has a broader view because they need all of those inputs from different areas to be able to solve problems holistically for an organization. And then also, I would say we want to create value. We want to affect our environment. In corporate land, we tend to want to have successful careers. And so this is a way of making sure that despite the exogenous pressures, whatever changes, the technology changes, geopolitical changes, your corporation changes, your career changes, you shift careers, regardless of all those changes that can happen and most likely will happen, you're making sure that you're still putting tools in your toolkit that allows you to find new ways to create value regardless of your context and as your context is changing. And so I'm very, very much a big fan of saying, you know what? Own the fact that you're multi-talented. Own the fact that you have multiple disciplines. You probably know a significant amount, and own the fact that people are going to want to oversimplify you. And if some do, okay, that's great. Good for them. You don't have to be for everyone. That's another message I tend to tell organizations and leadership clients. I don't have to be for you, and that's okay. There's always going to be another opportunity. As long as I'm being authentic to my experience, and as long as I can help others to be authentic to their experiences, let's remove some of these labels. Let's redefine things in a new way. The technology will help us do that anyway. So might as well be in the front seat of that.
I very much like the way that this is my metaphor, the kind of the ball of uncertainty has bounced through a number of our questions. Coming towards the end, I've got a couple more questions for you. I wanted to ask you what was the worst example of the worst misuse of data that you've witnessed, either close at hand or looking out in the corporate world. I know, apart from Apple TV and its delivery of Severance, that you're not the biggest fan of Apple, and wonder whether that company's walled garden might feature in your worst misuse of data, or is it something totally different?
So, in the responsible AI space, the AI ethics space, which is another area where I do lecture and teach, I think the idea of privacy and consent and confidentiality is such an important building block for trust. And I think our implementation of some of these mechanisms, we're doing the best we can. And the answer, it was the best we could do at the time, but we can always do a little bit better. I get concerned when we sometimes implement procedures and policies that attempt to be transparent and provide the user the opportunity for consent, but in reality, it's a little bit opaque. And it's not very straightforward. And therefore, people don't really understand, oh, when I click the box, oh, it meant I was also open to receiving communications from company A or company B, or, oh, I accidentally also gave away my data to be given to a third party firm. That's not always clear to consumers because the language is not clear. Our implementation of it isn't as clear as it could be. And in many organizations, they wait for the regulation to help them kind of make those proactive decisions to be more transparent and be more understandable to their consumers. So, not to pick on everyone, but a more recent, I would say, within the last 5 years, I think it was 2021, yes, Apple was fined. I believe it was Italy, where consumers, when they were when they were creating their Apple ID, again, trying to be transparent but not necessarily understandable, they didn't understand how their personal data was being used by Apple to create better services for them. But that was not clear enough, not understandable enough. And so government got involved, regulators got involved, and no surprise, fines and penalties for Apple. So I think in these spaces, going back to a previous conversation around disclosure of communicating with AI, this is going to be another area where do we have mechanisms today consistently across all user experiences that help us as consumers to say, no, I don't want to talk to AI. I want to talk to a real person. We don't have that at scale. It's not standardized. It's not normalized. And so we're opening ourselves up again to violate trust that we make with our consumers. And we are responsible as organizations to maintain that kind of trust with our consumers because it is a relationship. And so that's an area where I feel that it was a slight misuse. And there's opportunity to fix those things, but also as technologies change and evolve, there will be even more opportunities for that kind of we tried to do consent right, but we kind of didn't do it properly. So that's an area that I tend to watch because of AI ethics.
Perfect. Now, finally, Ceci, can you tell us where can our listeners and our viewers find out about you, your work, what you're up to online, social media? You mentioned Blue Sky.
Yeah, I am learning Blue Sky, to be very honest. I'm a private person for the most part. So learning how to communicate all those things. If anyone needs a student, I am a fairly good student of these things. But I am trying to learn Blue Sky. I am primarily on Substack. I'm primarily on LinkedIn. I do have a website. Everything is all connected. And so if anyone is interested in talking about these things further, finding community and creating community and or educating me. I don't know everything, so I'm so curious everyone else's perspective. Please, please, please reach out. I am so excited for what everyone can bring to the conversation.
Thank you so much for your time, Ceci. I think it's fair to say if there were more people with your approach to using data smarter, there'd be rather less malarkey in the world of AI and trust and authenticity in virtual environments, and rather more data-driven common sense. Ceci Dones, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for holding this space, and this was ever so enjoyable.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.